Dear boys and girls, this is MD Rizal Islam. Today we want to discuss about ecosystem, food chain and food web from chapter 13 environment around life. So dear boys and girls, let's start. First of all, what is the ecosystem? The exchange of energy and materials between plants and animals and both the living and non-living substances is called interaction. So what is interaction? The exchange of energy and materials between the living and non-living substances. It is called interaction. Interrelations are developed through this interaction. A place like this one, this world, is an ecosystem. Ecosystem means any unit of landscape where there are non-living substances, food producing green plants, some animals dependent on plants, and many more microorganisms for the disintegration of the dead bodies of the organisms, and a proper interrelation between these elements exist. It is the ecosystem. That means ecosystem means the reciprocal relationship between the living and non-living components of a certain environment. The next topic it is component of ecosystem. Living community inanimate components of the environment and the physical conditions collectively develop an ecosystem. Each of these main components is composed of some other small components. The living components are most diverse. The components of ecosystem, first of all, this is the non-living matter. The non-living matter harbors the habitats of living organisms, provide them with oxygen for respiration and supply some nutrient components as well. The components of all inanimate materials can be divided into two groups such as inorganic matter and organic matter. What is the inorganic matter? Water, air, and mineral substances in the soil which have not uh, evolved from any living body, rather before the emergence of organisms they exist, and they are the inorganic components of an ecosystem such as calcium, potassium, iron, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, etc. Organic matter, the waste materials of plants and animals, or the dead bodies of organisms or substances derived from them are called the organic matter of an ecosystem. They are generally termed as humus. This is an important question for you. What is humus? Some of the components of humus are urea, cells, tissue, and organs of plants and animals. The organic matters are more nutritious for plant. This is why for the cultivation of plants, more compost should be applied. Most animals also like soil compost rich of humus. The physical components of an ecosystem, the amount of sunlight, temperature, presence of water vapor in the air pressure, and wind, depth of height from the surface of the earth, under the ground or under the water, in different ways influence the ecosystem. With all their components, weather and climate of any locality developed. These are all the physiological components of an ecosystem. Then the next component of an ecosystem, it is living organisms. Living world is the active component of ecosystem. They cause changes in the environment through their activities. Living components of the environment are of three types. Number one, producer. Number two, consumer. And number three, decomposer or transformer. Then what about producer? Green plants in presence of sunlight, obtaining carbon dioxide from the air and absorbing water from the soil, produce their chief food, carbohydrates. At this time, oxygen is produced as a byproduct. The whole living world directly or indirectly depends on the photosynthesis process for their main food, carbohydrates. Moreover, the green plants in any way depend on green plants. Non-green plants in any way depend on green plants for the maintenance of their life. This is why photosynthesis is the production process of an ecosystem. Photosynthesis is the production process of an ecosystem. The producers are the green plants. On the other way, these green plants are called autotrophs because they can produce their food themselves. They don't depend on others for their food. So the question is what is autotrophs? Then next component of an ecosystem, it is the consumer. No animal can produce food from non-living substances in the environment. They directly or indirectly depend on plants for their food. This is why they are called heterotrophic animal. Question is, what is the heterotrophic animals? The animals which directly consume plants as their food are called herbivorous. They are the consumer of the first line. Grasshopper, hens, cow, goats, and deer are the examples of herbivorous animal. The animal which depend on herbivorous animal for their food are called secondary consumers or consumer or of second line. They are carnivorous kind of animals. Toad, fox, tiger are the examples of carnivorous animal. The animals which eat secondary consumer are also carnivorous. They may be called tertiary consumers or top consumers such as peacock, snake, tiger, etc. These are a kind of animals who like more to eat dead bodies or other organisms than the living body of them. For instance, fox, hyena, etc. They are called scavenger because they keep the environment clean by eating the dead bodies of different organisms. Then last topic, it is last components of an ecosystem, it is the decomposer. The microorganisms like some bacteria and fungus get their food from waste of plants and animals and their dead bodies, and as a consequences they get mixed with the soil and water by being decomposed. These mixed components can be again consumed as food components. This is why this microorganism, bacteria, fungi are called decomposer or transformer. The question is, it is a very important question for you. Explain the role of decomposer of an ecosystem. or the question is, what do you mean by transformer? This is the outline of the components of ecosystem. This is the components of ecosystem: non-living subcomponent, physical component, living component. Non-living component, it may be inorganic or organic. Living components, it is classified into three groups: producer, consumer, decomposer. Consumer, it is first line, second line, third line, or top consumers. Then the next topic, it is ecosystem of pond. A classic example of an aquatic ecosystem is the ecosystem of a small pond. That is the classic or an ideal example of any aquatic ecosystem. It is the ecosystem of a small pond, ecosystem of a pond. In fact, a pond is an ecologically independent and self-regulating unit. The ecosystem of pond is composed of two main components. These are abiotic components and biotic components. What about the abiotic components? The abiotic components of a pond ecosystem are water. Abiotic, that means non-living components of a pond ecosystem are water, dissolved oxygen, carbon dioxide, and some organic matters. Organisms can use these elements directly. Biotic components, the elements that constitute the biotic components of a pond ecosystem are producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and decomposers of different types. These are the biotic components. And biotic components are three types: producer, consumer, and decomposer. So let us see what about the producer of a pond ecosystem. The producers are the photosynthetic algae and plants of a shallow water. The free-floating microscopic organisms are called plankton. Very important question for you, dear boys and girls. What is plankton? So you have to write down the free-floating microscopic organisms in an aquatic ecosystem. It is called plankton. And what is phytoplankton? The free-floating microscopic plants. It is the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, green algae, and other aquatic plants which produce food through the photosynthesis process are called producers. That means here the phytoplankton, green plants, and other aquatic plants, they are grouped into producer. Consumer of primary level, different types of floating insects, larvae of mosquito, very small animals, zooplankton, etc. are the consumers of first level. Here it is a question, what is zooplankton? Zooplankton, it is the microscopic free floating animals of a pond ecosystem. It is called zooplankton. The free floating small animals are called zooplankton. These consumers cannot produce their food themselves, so They live directly consuming the primary producers. The next component of a pond ecosystem, it is consumer of second level. Small fishes, some aquatic insects, toad, etc., are the consumers of second level. They cannot produce their food themselves and cannot consume directly the primary producers. They choose the consumers of first level as their food, and this is why they are secondary level of consumer. Then consumer of tertiary level, the consumers which eat secondary consumers such as small fishes, prawns, etc. are the examples of tertiary consumer since they eat secondary consumer as their food. The example of tertiary consumer of a pond ecosystem, it is shoal, vetki, boal like big fishes, and stock are the consumers of tertiary level. Then what about the decomposers of a pond ecosystem? Many fungi and bacteria live in the pond as saprophytes, and they are decomposers. They are floating in the water or at the bottom in the muddy habitat. They attack living and non-living organisms and help them to be degraded. As a result, organic and inorganic chemical components required for the producers are produced again by them. The producers in the pond can again consume the substances decomposed by the decomposers. Look at here, this is the ecosystem diagram. This is the diagrammatic presentation of an ecosystem of pond. Here it is the decomposer. This is the abiotic components, physical components. This is the producers, phytoplankton, zooplankton. Then this is the primary consumer, zooplankton. This is the secondary consumer, this is the small fishes, and this is the tertiary consumer, large or big fishes. These are the components of a pond ecosystem. The next question, it is about what is the food chain. What is food chain? Actually, in an ecosystem, what type of components are transferred from one level to another level? Actually, in an ecosystem, nutrition and energy is transferred from one level to another level. So, what is the definition of food chain? The transfer of food energy from producers through a series of food level, that is herbivorous to carnivores and carnivores to decomposer. That is the transfer of food energy from producers through a series of food levels, that is herbivorous, primary consumer to carnivorous, secondary and tertiary consumers to the decomposer in the ecosystem is called food chain. Thus, the food chain is a feeding relationship. Food chain is a feeding relationship in which a carnivore eats a herbivore which has been eating plants. In an ecosystem, there may be different types of food chain. Usually, 3 types of food chains are found in the nature. For example, first of all, it is predator food chain. The food chain where organisms of the primary level are of the smallest size and consecutively consumers of higher level prey the organisms of lower level and at last eat them is called predator food chain. Then parasitic food chain. What is the example of predator food chain? For example, then grasshopper. First of all, grass, then grasshopper, then toad, then snake. This food chain is the example of predator food chain. Then parasitic food chain. Parasitic plants and animals in most of the cases derive their food from the host much larger in size than they are. In some cases, some other smaller parasites are dependent on all the parasites for their foods. In this type of food chain, primary producers may not be always at the beginning level, and for these reasons the chain remains incomplete because producers are absent here. The next food chain, it is saprophytic food chain or detritus food chain. If any food chain is stressed from the dead organisms to the different trophic levels, then it is called saprophytic food chain. Needless to say, this kind of food chain is always incomplete, and food chain develops only the part of the total interaction or interrelations of an ecosystem. Parasitic and saprophytic food chains are always incomplete since there is no producers in them. Both type of food chains to maintain their activities depend on one or more levels of the predator food chain. That means parasitic food chain and saprophytic food chains are interrelated. That means it depends on the predator, the components of predator food chain. So the food chains of an ecosystem are based on the activities of the photosynthesis of the producers, green plants. The next question, it is food web. Next topic, it is food web. What is food web? In most of the cases, it is found that the same consumer can be placed in different trophic levels. In this way, some food chains collectively may form a net or web-like structure. It is called food web. This is a true phenomenon for both the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. This concept would be clearer by the concept of a pond ecosystem. Look at here. This is a figure of food web, and here it is total 5 food chains are interrelated with each other, and these 5 separate 5 food chains together form a net-like structure, and this net-like structure, it is called food web. For example, producer is algae, then algae, it is zooplankton. Big fish takes the zooplankton as its food, then this big fish is eaten by this hawk. So algae, small fish, hawk, or in another way, algae, zooplankton, big fish, hawk. So like this, here it is total 5 food chains are interconnected with each other, and this interconnection make a net-like or web-like structure. It is called food web. Then next topic, it is nutrition flow in ecosystem. The way of flow of nutrition in an ecosystem. It is observed that plants accept inorganic substances and manufacture food by the process of photosynthesis. A small portion of the food produced by the plants is used by them, and rest is reserved in the plant's body. The herbivorous animal eat these, and gradually herbivorous are eaten by the carnivorous animal. The decomposers transform the plants, herbivorous and carnivorous animals into organic substances. Using the inorganic substances, the green plants can again manufacture food with the help of solar energy. In an ecosystem, the transfer or flow of energy and nutrient from one trophic level to other is in succession. In each trophic level of food chain, energy available decreases step by step. Decomposers rot the dead body of the organisms, and inorganic nutrients are stored in the nutrient storage of the environment. The green plants again find the inorganic nutrients from the storage environment. The cyclic flow of nutrients is known as nutrient flow. Thus, food chain and nutrient flow are the important characters of an ecosystem. This diagram shows the nutrition flow. For example, nutrition flow from producers, it enters into the herbivorous, and then herbivorous to carnivorous. When these 3 types of living organism becomes died, then decomposer decompose the dead bodies of these 3 living components, and the decomposed part, that is the humus, it is again received by these producers. Then it is energy flow in the ecosystem. The sun is the main source of energy in any ecosystem. From the amount of light and heat energy that reach the planet Earth, the green plants store only 2% of the received energy through the photosynthesis process, primarily as the chemical energy in carbohydrates for the requirement of the next stage of the ecosystem. This energy stored in plants reaches different trophic levels through different kinds of food chain. At last, the energy again comes back to the environment by the terminal acts of the decomposer. The herbivorous animals, consumers of first level, maintain their life by eating leaves, stems, flowers, fruits, seeds, or roots of green plants. The way of chemical energy produced in green plants reaches first to the herbivorous animal. The carnivorous animal who lives by eating the consumers of first level, herbivorous animal, are the consumers of second level. The chemical energy from consumers of first level is now transferred this way to the bodies of the consumer of second level. Exactly, the chemical energy from the consumers of second level reaches the consumers of third level in the form of food. If any other superior consumers eat the consumers of third level as their food, This way, the energy reaches the consumers of top level. After the death, procurement of energy is stopped in all the organisms. Then the chemical energy stored in the dead bodies come back to the environment in the form of inanimate substances and energy after being broken by the activities of decomposer. The energy being stored in the different inanimate substances of the environment becomes suitable for the plants to use again. And this is why the flow of natural energy in ecosystem is being continued. Some energy gets wasted in every level of all types of food chain. The herbivorous consumers doesn't store that amount of energy which it procures from the producers green plants. Again, the amount of nutrition that a consumer of second level obtains from the herbivorous consumers doesn't even reach its own body, as some of the energy is released in the inanimate environment. This is why at the time of transferring food from one organism to another, mass energy goes out of the system in accordance with the principle of ecosystem. This is why if in an ecosystem the number of trophic level is fewer, energy waste decreases accordingly. This is the flowchart of energy circulation. That means the transfer of energy from producer to different consumer levels, and we can say energy flow in an ecosystem in a linear way, not cyclic way. And after completing all of these topics, a homework for you. This is the food web of a terrestrial ecosystem, and then find out how many food chains are there and write down the names of that food chains. Dear boys and girls, try to solve this problem at home, and be fine, everybody.